Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm never quite sure exactly when I hit start, how long it is before this goes. It seems like YouTube has got quite a lot of delay on it at the moment. Looking at the live sort of feedback screen they give you here, seems like even more delay than usual. So hopefully you will be seeing this. We'll see here. There's a public view, so we'll see. The public view still seems to be behind and showing the title screen. Anyway, right. Can anybody hear me? Is anybody there? Hopefully, hopefully this is going okay. Wait a minute. Let me click that there. Public view. Ah, that's better. That might show me something. Looks fine from here. Great. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. I was just looking, I think, at the wrong screen on YouTube. Give you like a live preview window, and there seems to be two of them, and for some reason I was looking at the wrong one, which wasn't showing exactly what was going on. But anyway, good evening. Welcome back again, everyone. See, we've got a lot of usual names here. W. Boomans, Tom Kussner, great, Andrew Tollovey, and some new names, I think. David Conley, Adam Heslop, thank you very much if it's your first time here. If not, then welcome back. It's great seeing new people on here, trying to keep track of names of everyone. But anyway, so yes, this evening, slightly less prepared than I was hoping to be because I had a slight family emergency earlier, but hopefully that's all in hand now. So anyway, going to be talking about smart contracts. So like I said, I'm a little less prepared, so this might be a bit more of a discussion and questions and answer type thing than a prepared thing, but we'll see how we go. So yeah, what is a smart contract? People have no doubt heard of things called smart contracts. Probably the most kind of immediate thing that a lot of people think of when they've heard of smart contracts, if they've been anything involved in cryptocurrency, is Ethereum. Ethereum is probably one of the most well-known platforms for smart contracts and why Ethereum is used so much. There's also other systems. A lot of other blockchains have the ability to run smart contracts in as well. I believe Digibyte may do. Is it Nem or Neo? One of the two, I can't remember. Is similar in terms of sort of being able to run smart contracts like Ethereum. And Codius by Ripple is also a smart contract platform as well. So what are smart contracts? Well, they mean it's one of these words. Again, it's a lot that happens in cryptocurrency that it's a word that has been kind of used to mean almost anything, which kind of means it's quite hard to describe it in that regards. But in very simple terms, a smart contract is some bit of logic that is run on a blockchain. The word smart is sometimes overplaying it a bit. They can be actually quite simple. There's not necessarily anything smart about them. And contract is also a little bit misleading because most people, when they think of contracts, they think of large numbers of piece of paper that they sign at the bottom. But boiling it right down, a smart contract is simply a bit of code, a bit of logic, a set of rules that is executed by the blockchain in a sort of an autonomous fashion. So the whole idea being is it's some kind of rules that can be run by something other than a human, right? And that takes away some of the trust implications. So the idea being is that it's something that can be run in which you don't have to trust a human in the process. As with most aspects to do with anything to do with computer security is great until you put humans in the mix, and then it all breaks down. So an example to start with here that might make this a little clearer. So just randomly searching around, found this diagram here. It's a reasonable one that might, if I just zoom in a little bit on this, that might help. Think of a crowdfunding platform, something like Kickstarter, or anything along those lines. So with one of these crowdfunding platforms, a number of people pledge some money to try and reach some kind of goal. When that goal is reached and a deadline is reached, then the money is sent to the people that are running the project. If the goal is not reached or the deadline is passed, then the money is returned back. So say we set a goal, we say, okay, we are going to build some new widget and we need $50,000 to do so. And we're going to ask people to fund $50,000. And people start putting money in. Some people put $100 in, some people put 1,000, some people put 50, whatever. People put money in and they send it all to, for this example, say Kickstarter, and they kind of accumulate the money, and when it reaches 50,000 and we reach the deadline, say we had 1 month in which to raise that, that point is reached. The money is then given over to say us if we're running the project. We then get our 50,000 and we can then go and build our widgets. If 50,000 is not reached, then the money is returned back to the donors, because the idea being is that if the goal is not reached, then there's not enough money to actually successfully execute the project, so you want to give the money back to the original donors. Now at the moment that is done by something like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, a company that does that. This could be replaced with a smart contract, because a smart contract could be a simple little bit of logic that says, here is an address, a cryptocurrency address, in which people send money to. So you could send your XRP, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever it might be that you're using for the platform, to this address. When we reach a certain amount that has been specified, then we release that money to the end recipient. If we don't reach that, or we pass some sort of time frame, then the money is all sent back to the original people. It's returned to the senders. Okay? Hopefully that is a fairly simple example of what you could use a smart contract for. So it's accumulating money until you reach some goal or some time period is met. If it is, you send the money to the destination. If it's not, you send it back. So the idea of doing this with a smart contract is you don't need a company like Kickstarter or Indiegogo in the middle. Because what happens, okay, Kickstarter and Indiegogo are fairly well known. It's unlikely that if they're going to take the money and then suddenly disappear off into the night. But you can imagine a scenario where it might not be Kickstarter or Indiegogo, but some other organization that's doing this, and you would need to trust them that they're not going to suddenly take your money and run off. Doing it with a smart contract, these rules are run normally on a blockchain. So in the case of Ethereum, they're run on the Ethereum blockchain, and it is the Ethereum blockchain that acts as the trusted party, and that you trust the blockchain as a whole. And so what happens is that code is written, those rules are sent, they're then immutable, they can't be changed, and the smart contract effectively executes. You send it the money to the address, it then executes, and it does what is in the rules. So in this case, accumulates the money, sends it on when a certain threshold is reached in time or money to the destination. If it's not, it's returned back to the sender. So the idea is that you don't need to trust a central authority. Now W. Boomans asks, how do we trust a contract? How do we know that does what someone promises? Well, in many cases the contracts are visible. You can actually see what they look like. So for example, here is an example. So in the Ethereum system, the contracts are written in a programming language, a Java-like programming language called Solidity. Now you don't have to understand what all this code does, but it has certain functions in it. So there's a transfer function here, and various approval functions. There's a function to burn currency, for example, that would destroy tokens. And you would then create this contract. You can then deploy the contract, and it is then running on the blockchain, and you can then send tokens to it. And so you can actually see those. I should have brought this up beforehand. There is a way to see them. So where I said, like I said, I wish I was slightly more prepared for this to bring this up. C20 top tokens. Sorry, I've forgotten the address of where you can view them. You can see Ethereum contracts. Ah, here we go. Right. So these are the contracts here. Each contract has an address, and in there we should be able to see the code of the contract. Here we go. So here's the code of the contract. Now, you would have to be able to, understand and read through the code. In most cases, a lot of smart contracts are relatively straightforward in what they do. They're normally quite simple. It's normally a case of taking some funds and doing something with them under certain conditions. So you can imagine, for example, you could create like a betting smart contract, in which is a case of, okay, everybody can send some money in, and if a football score reaches a certain score, then people get paid the money out again. And what would happen would be the smart contract itself would be responsible for communicating with a website that has the football scores, and it would see what the scores are. So you would send it money in way of effectively a bet, and you would say, okay, I bet on this score, and it would be the smart contract that would at a certain time period say, okay, let's look up the scores on this website, see what the scores are, see who's bet against what, and return the funds, in proportion to the bets. And depending upon what the odds were on the bets, people would win a certain amount. But that would be without needing a human involved at all, you see, and that's what's quite interesting about this, is that it removes this trust level. So from that you can build all sorts of things, and this is what's quite cool with smart contracts, is that you can start with just these basic primitives and actually build quite a lot of advanced things on top of them. Now, as with a lot of things in this space, people are still trying to work out exactly what those things should be or would be. Lots of ideas, a lot of wacky ideas of, well, let's put this in a smart contract and that in a smart contract. Some things are novelties, some things make sense, some things don't make sense. And no doubt over time we will find the better things. But people are talking about things like selling houses. Did I get an example here? Yeah, so you might have sort of selling and buying a house. So you've got a buyer and a seller. One has to put some money up in the way of, say, a cryptocurrency. The other one has to put the deeds up, assuming, say, the deeds are digitized. So you've got some land deed or house deed that's been digitized. I'll make this bigger again. Where'd it go? You have some digitized land deed, and the smart contract can effectively act a bit like an escrow. Now, again, that might sound familiar to people that that have been involved with XRP, because the XRP ledger has escrows, and escrows are an example of a very simple smart contract. An escrow generally is just a case of some funds are locked up until such a period of time, or some condition, some sort of key is given, and then they're unlocked and passed on to a destination address, or if it fails, they're returned back again. And that's what an escrow is. So an escrow is an example of a very specific, limited smart contract. And in the case of, say, XRP and say Bitcoin, they've got these very simple smart contracts that can be used just to do what are called atomic swaps. And so that is the ability for somebody to exchange one digital asset for another and nobody be able to renege on the deal. You don't want a case where I give you something and then you run off with it before giving me back what you're meant to give me, right? It's all or nothing. Either I get what you have and you get what I have, or we both start back with what we had. There's no halfway house. It either all executes or it doesn't execute at all. And that is another example of like a smart contract. So Tom asks, I really like the idea of using smart contracts for DIY insurance with your family and friends. Insurance in what way, Tom? Insurance in a way of kind of letting them potentially have access to some money in some event. I mean, you could look at this kind of depending. The more things that get sort of digitally enabled, obviously the power of this grows and grows. So you're talking insurance there, where you could talk about something like car insurance. If you can imagine that car insurance policies were digitized, were stored in smart contracts, such that if you have an accident, maybe even to the point where the cars themselves are able to effectively agree, yes, I hit you or you hit me or some collision occurred, and some smart contract could execute in which the funds you have locked away in some kind of insurance policy get exchanged with the other party. That could be doable. So W Boons asks, I hear they run in a virtual machine, a VM. How does this work with a ledger? I assume it's separate from the mining. Yes, so different blockchains handle it in different ways. So with Ethereum, smart contracts are pretty much baked into the blockchain. They're part of it. And Bitcoin has a thing called Script, or I think it is Script, which is a simple scripting language. You can do sort of small, very rudimentary smart contract type stuff in Bitcoin. With Ripple, they went down the other way, and Codius is a completely separate platform. And what they did, they stopped development of Codius because they realized that actually what would be better would be if they finished the work they were doing with Interledger Protocol, ILP. Now, if you remember, Interledger Protocol allows you to connect different ledgers together. So if you support Interledger, you can effectively receive payment in any currency that is connected to an Interledger network. So by finishing that bit first, then building Codius, they actually connected Codius to Interledger. So although Codius is made by Ripple and by the Ripple developers, it's actually able to receive payment in anything that Interledger supports. So you could use, say, Ethereum or Bitcoin or Digibyte. If they're connected to the Interledger network, you could use any currency to fund a Codius contract. And actually Codius, instead of using, say, Solidity that Ethereum uses, Codius uses JavaScript, and you can run whatever you want. Codius uses a lot of the same primitives that are used for just general conventional hosting. What's happened over the years recently is hosting has become kind of compartmentalized, and this notion of what are called containers. And a container is a self-contained set of code, dependencies, libraries, all the bits you need to run. And the idea is you can move this container just like its namesake, a shipping container. You can move the whole shipping container without having to unpack it and deal with all the individual bits. Codius uses a lot of the same mechanisms. So you can kind of think of Codius as a bit like a virtual machine somewhere that's able to pay for its own runtime via cryptocurrencies, so via XRP, for example, and it pays. You effectively pay the contract to run, and you can choose with Codius. You can choose whether you want it to run on just one computer somewhere on the network, or 5 computers or 10 computers, depending upon what resilience you want. You can kind of choose that. So Codius is a little more rudimentary in terms of what it gives you, but it's a lot more flexible than Ethereum. So one of the big examples, for example, is I think I'm right in saying that Codius can actually keep secrets. So Codius could generate a wallet and keep the secret key to that wallet itself without anybody knowing it. It could generate it randomly and keep it, and nobody would even know it until such a time that smart contract decides to give that key up or send that money elsewhere. So you could have a Codius contract be completely autonomous and take funds and deal with those funds in some fashion without anybody ever having the keys to that wallet that the Codius contract has access to. So the Codius contract could create a wallet with a random key, hold on to that key. You could send it funds, because remember, you don't need the key to send it funds, you just need the address. You could send it funds, it could deal with those funds in however it wants. It could then send those funds on at a later point, so pay it out, be it an insurance contract or a gambling contract or whatever it might be, and it could then send those funds out. I don't think you could do that in Ethereum, for example. I don't think Ethereum can hold a wallet as such, or a secret in that way. So someone says, Karma coverage mini-series on XRP chat are worth reading when we're talking about different insurances. Okay, cool, that could be something to check out. I don't know if I can find them here, but I'll have a quick look. Karma coverage? Not sure how it's Karma coverage. Insurance. Let's try Karma coverage insurance. Let's see if we can see what they're talking about here. Okay, now I'll probably take a bit more time to actually kind of find where this thread is on here. But yeah, like I said, the point being is, while smart contracts can be quite simple in themselves, they can be quite complex as well, and there have been instances where there have been bugs in smart contracts that result in funds being lost or reset or stolen, just because, not to do with security of the network as a whole, but just the logic by how they pay out. So for example, you could imagine, like I said, a gambling type, a betting smart contract that bets on football scores, and there might be a bug in it in which a particular football score, is for, I don't know, random example, completely contrived. But imagine if the football score came back as -1, and that, a score of -1 the contract can't handle, and it does something weird and sends funds the opposite direction because it multiplied something by -1, and so it kind of comes back. So there's been a few examples of some bugs in smart contracts that have caused issues, for example. So W. Woomans asks, can the contract be reused by different people, or does each need to spin their own? Good question. I think that depends upon the blockchain platform itself. But I think, like you saw, you could see the code there, so you could get that code and deploy it. And when you deploy a smart contract, for example on Ethereum, you get an address. So where is it here? Contract address. And so when you deploy your contract, so even if I was to deploy this same code, I would get a different contract address. Copy source to clipboard, read contract, copy. There might be a way to kind of clone it here, for example. I'm not sure how you could do that within this particular editor, but you could possibly clone it. But even so, if I deployed it, I would get a different contract address, and it's that contract address that represents this particular contract, because, like I said, once it's put up there, it's immutable. It can't be changed, as far as I'm aware, because the point being is that you wouldn't want somebody to go and then change what it does without people necessarily realizing. Oh, you may have seen this what's called ERC20. So ERC20 is just a standard for smart contracts and tokens, in that it it defines a number of methods, a number of functions that a contract has to define, and that gives you a token. So let's see here if we can see one of the see one of the tokens. Can I see from here? Read contract. Right. So so ERC20 is a specification for smart contracts that define the contract has to have a certain number of functions. So there's a function called, name, function called total supply, one called decimals, version, that defines some parameters of this token symbol. So epic is a symbol. So this is why Ethereum was used so much for ICOs, these initial coin offerings, these fundraising efforts, because it allowed you to create your own token by it just being a smart contract. And it's a smart contract that effectively just keeps track of funds, and that's kind of all it is on there. Probably didn't explain that very well. Andrew Tollerby, any thoughts on where legal jurisdiction resides for smart contracts on decentralized ledgers? I wonder where you go with legal dispute, bug in the code, outcome unexpected. Yeah, good question, Andrew. I think that's entirely up in the air at the moment. I don't know. What is interesting actually is there is a course being set up and run. I can't remember if it's been made public yet, so I'm not going to say too much more about it in terms of who's involved. But I do know that, for instance, in this case, there's a course being developed by a university professor in law to deal with smart contracts and law. So they're coming at it really from the law point of view, not the technology point of view. They have an interest in technology, but they're looking at what does this mean from a legal point of view. How can you codify certain legal constructs and processes into smart contracts and the blockchain? And that's being done with a university. And like I said, I don't know if it's public yet, so I'm not going to say any more about it because I don't know if it's information has been fully released yet in terms of what they're doing. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Like I said, coming at it specifically from the legal point of view as to what contracts can you deal with. I mean, if you think about the legal profession, they deal with contracts all the time, be it to do with conveyancing, buying and selling houses, to do it probate, when somebody dies and that kind of thing. Agreements, prenuptial agreements, wedding agreements, business contracts, all sorts of these things could be represented using a smart contract. And that possibly opens up the capability that they could be managed effectively on their own without necessarily needing lawyers to get involved in them, which some lawyers might not like the idea of because they might think it's putting them out of a job. Hopefully it means they can work on more interesting things and automate the more mundane things. So we'll see. But in terms of legal jurisdiction, Andrew, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's, no doubt people are looking at that, but I don't think there's a definitive answer to that. W. Bullmans, can they be made private? Again, it would depend upon the smart contract platform. If they were private, then you wouldn't really know what it's going to do. So you'd have to trust that it's going to do what you think it's going to do, and I can't see that would make much sense. But it could be it could be a possibility that you could do that, but I can't see that would make a huge amount of sense at the moment, because you want to be able to verify and look at the code as to what it's going to do before you were sort of interacting with it. And another thing is, smart contracts can interact with other smart contracts. This is where these building blocks, and you get some quite advanced things, so that you can have one smart contract interacting with another smart contract. You could potentially have smart contracts in the end effectively negotiating for you, being some kind of agent on your behalf. You could have a smart contract in which you entrust funds to, and you say, okay, you go off and do stuff on my behalf, buy things on my behalf, or operate some kind of trades or whatever. I entrust you with the funds. You go ahead and do that, and they become effectively an agent on your behalf, doing transactions based upon obviously a set of rules that smart contract has. So yeah, I think that's probably, let's see, we've gone through a bit there about tokens. We've looked at smart contract, a bit of an example of a smart contract in Ethereum, Solidity. Like I say, I think you can do. I think Digibyte has smart contracts, perhaps. No, maybe not. Codius, of course. See the Ripple-based ones. As they say, fair warning: Codius is in beta. Expect dragons. But yes, you can write Codius programs in any programming language. So you do a lot with JavaScript, but you don't need to learn a specific programming language like Solidity. And it also gives you the ability to use other libraries, for example, that might be in a programming language. Oh yeah, sorry. One big thing I probably should have mentioned: decentralized apps, dApps, as they're referred to. This is taking smart contracts further, I suppose, in that you're actually creating an app. Oh, I told you the example of betting. Well, you could say, well, that's a betting app. That's a dApp, a decentralized app for betting. That you have some kind of rules of a game in which you're sending it funds. So let's see, what do they say here? Not a huge amount here. Decentralized apps, smart contracts. Let's see here. Yeah, so smart contracts on Codius can hold assets, multiple math-based distribution ledgers such as Bitcoin XRP, collect information from any source, be written in standard programming languages. So with that you can make quite a lot of things with some quite simple kind of constructs. Like I think smart contracts. Is it NEM? I think. So I think NEM is the other one that does a lot of smart contracts in here. Use cases. Escrow services, so talking about there. Oh yeah, decentralized organizations. DAO, decentralized autonomous organizations. This is again taking it further, in that you can have voting. So you can have, a dApp, a smart contract that runs an organization, and there's a few these things, DAOs. DAO. Let's see if what can bring up here. Not data access object. The DAO. Decentralized autonomous organization. So there's one particular one called DAO, but I think it's more of a generalized term here. Yeah, and the idea behind this DAO is that you can actually have, say you have some kind of administrative organization that does something. A residents association, right? You live in an apartment block. There are 20 apartments. Everybody has one share of the management organization, and the management organization holds some funds which are then distributed for maintenance of the building, and everybody gets a vote on what what the management organization spends the money on. Well, you could create a DAO using smart contracts and dApps effectively to run on the blockchain. So you don't, you could have a situation where token ownership is used. So instead of the 21 million Bitcoin or the 100 billion XRP, you create whatever 20, even maybe 20 tokens that one person has. Each flat has one token, or maybe you could have whatever, a million tokens, and you distribute them in proportion to the value of the property or the number of square meters that the property holds, or whatever it is. And those tokens can then be used in a voting mechanism to vote on proposals. So people could put proposals to the DAO, and then they are voted on as to whether or not they are accepted, and that can be sort of all modelled using smart contracts, without the need of an actual human organisation there. So you can create things that are very fair in the fact that you've taken all the human elements out and it's just governed by rules. Obviously, it can be quite harsh and quite hard in that there's limited flexibility, but it's an interesting approach to things, and it can take care of situations where you want to make sure that there's no contention in decisions, and the decisions are purely based upon the votes and how they're cast and what happens there. So so we covered smart contracts, DAOs, dApps. Like I said, just using a smart contract to build a sort of an application. An example could be something like a crowdfunding thing, such as Kickstarter or Indiegogo. That's probably everything I have to say about smart contracts. Like I said, this is not intended to go into too much detail. Each smart contract platform has its own thing, but just to give an idea as to what smart contracts are, and hopefully give you an idea of what they could be used for. So Crawty asks, in your opinion, what is currently the best use case platform or platforms for smart contracts with regards to digital asset use? I'm sorry, that's just too much of an open-ended question. I'm not involved in smart contracts enough to really be able to say which one is better than the other. For instance, Ethereum is used so much for these things. That's kind of the go-to for a lot of people. But like I said, there are others as well, and Codius has some advantages, but it's still in beta. There's a lot of other blockchain systems out there that are, allowing people to do smart contracts. So I can't really say. You'd have to sort of look into it, and it would depend upon what your use case is as well. Because you might have parameters around the speed you need it to execute, or data sources you need it to be able to access that it might or might not, depending upon the platform it's on. So it would depend a lot more on your use case. So yeah, any other questions? If not, we'll wrap it up. And as usual, if there's any questions beyond this, then feel free to ask them in the comments down below, or grab me on Twitter, and I'll answer them there. But if not, we'll finish a little early than usual, and thank you very much. And feel free to subscribe to the channel, and that's slowly growing here, which is good. And if anybody has any ideas for further things they want covered in future weeks, then let me know, and I will talk about them. Great. Otherwise, thanks very much, and good evening.